Committee Member Penny Owens. Committee Member Todd Rulon Miller.
Present.
Committee Member Lee Heller.
Present.
Committee Member Ann Burdette.
Present.
Committee Member Stephanie Moret.
Present.
Committee Member Lori Gaskin. Not present. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We now want to move to approval of the minutes from November 20th. There is an attachment in your packet. Our recommendation is to waive its reading and approve these minutes of this special meeting of November 20th of this year.
So moved.
Seconded.
Very good. Do we need to have an individual vote or just a round?
Just a round, please.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition or abstention? None heard. That passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. Any agenda adjustments or public comment this evening? Hearing none. Very good. We'll go ahead and move to committee member and staff communications. Anything from either?
We don't have any managers' reports.
Okay, very good. Then next up is an election and action of vice chair for this next term, which I think is the calendar year of 2025. Is that correct? Very good. I guess I would ask for anyone that's interested or nominations of those that would like to fulfill the role of vice chair for 2025.
I would love to see either Stephanie or Ann, who've been on the committee for a while now but haven't been in a leadership role, if they're interested.
I think Ann's been on a little longer.
What is the time commitment of being the vice chair or the chair beyond these meetings?
Good question.
Would anyone who's performed in those roles like to answer?
I can give you my own experience, and that is as vice chair, it certainly was expected based on my availability to step in and run a meeting if a chair was not going to be able to make that meeting, right? And so I think within that, the attendance at which next year will be 8 meetings, I think should be something that one can commit to and prioritize so that, that person is here and certainly able to step in if the chair was unavailable.
I'll add that I remember, was it last year, the year before, the vice chair was not available at one point, and so we just picked somebody else to step in. So it's not critical that if you had to miss a meeting that the chair also had to miss, that there's a way to cope. And then my experience as chair, again, the workload wasn't any greater than just being a committee member, other than conducting these meetings.
It's a fair point. Thank you. Penny?
Yeah, and I just wanted to second that also. As vice chair this year, Chris was available for all the meetings. Maybe one field meeting I had to step in, we were all there anyways, so it was no additional workload at all.
Great, thank you.
In that case, I am good with that nomination if nobody else is running.
Yeah, do I make a motion for her, or does she make it for herself?
No, please, if you'd like to, go ahead.
I think Ann should be the vice chair.
Happy to second that.
All right. Do we need individual vote or
Just an all-person vote is fine.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition or abstention? Hearing none. Ann, congratulations and thank you for fulfilling the role of vice chair for 2025.
And just a reminder that Penny Owens is going to take over as chair unless there's any other, if you don't want to take over as chair, then we can talk about that.
Big shoes to fill, but I will do my best.
It's only a size 10. It's really not that big. Okay, well, great. Well, I guess at this point I'll say thank you to everyone on the committee. It's been certainly a pleasure to fulfill the role of chair. I'm happy to have done it and look forward to Penny and Ann stepping in. So thank you very much. Excellent. I think that brings us to our business items and Jill Murray to share both the residential street sweeping program as well as some water quality research and monitoring summaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Klein. And before I jump in, I'm going to say thank you for your service. I think as reflected by the presentation that I'm about to give, which was based on your request, I think you played a really active role as chair, and you asked for information from us and even some actions from us. And I think that's one of the main purposes of this committee. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So I was forwarded an email from the manager of the Creeks Division with some questions that Chair Klein had about street sweeping. And this presentation was delayed, I think, a couple of times for various reasons. Other meetings were canceled or other items were more pressing. So it's not as pressing right now. So this is really more informational for all of you. It was informational for me to put it together. So our street sweeping program it has two main components, which is the residential street sweeping, and that is operated by the Sustainability and Resilience Department. And then the commercial street sweeping program is operated by Public Works and by Streets. And I'll get into a little bit more about who does what within sustainability and resilience on a future slide. The public can go onto our street sweeping page and see the routes and when the different areas are signed and when they can expect to see the street sweepers go by. Both of these programs, which are mapped here, are performed under contract right now with Street Sweeping Corporation of California. And we put out the bids together, but the prices were separate, and combined they were the low bidder. So downtown parking also sweeps parking lots and State Street, and that's done separately. Some of the water quality benefits of street sweeping. Some researchers say that street sweeping is by far, by order of magnitude, the best bang for the buck when it comes to pollutant removal. Street sweeping can remove pollutants from paved surfaces, including trash, sediment, road wear particles. The road wear particles can contain PAHs. Tire wear particles, which are a real contemporary hot issue right now. I'll explain more about that. And leaf litter. So the tire wear particles can have some components in them, even such as 6-ppd quinone, which has been found to be extremely toxic to coho salmon and less toxic to other salmonid species. And so PAHs, microplastics, nutrients, heavy metals, and bacteria can all be associated with those larger materials that are removed by street sweeping. So in our stormwater jargon, we call this a non-structural stormwater best management practice, and there will be a test. Non-structural as opposed to things like bioretention and swales and things where we're building something to filter stormwater. The city is not required to do any street sweeping under our stormwater permit, but we have been sweeping and have been improving water quality that way. So the onus is on us to not go backwards when it comes to actual water quality. The trash policy, I've also referred to this as the trash amendments before. This is the newer requirements that we, from our priority land uses, not discharge any trash larger than 5 millimeters, and street sweeping will be a huge component of that effort. Some jurisdictions with TMDLs, which is a pollutant regulation that we don't have in Santa Barbara right now, they can receive a 5 to 10% total pollutant load reduction credit for street sweeping. And that number is really, there's a lot of, I don't know about contention. There just isn't consensus on what that number should be and whether jurisdictions should be getting more credit or less credit. And that was part of understanding that disagreement was part of what led us to submit our street sweeping microplastic grant, trying to get answers to things like that, questions like that. But one regulation that has come forward, and I'll talk about this more in a couple of slides, is that the California Department of Industrial Regulation is now stating that street sweeping is a public work because it's a maintenance of public roads, and that we need to pay street sweeper operators prevailing wages. And I will talk more about that. So we, in conjunction with our street sweeping, we also have our catch basin inlet screens, and these really work hand in hand. So the top left there shows how the screens can block trash from getting into the storm drain during dry weather. And wind really does, wind and like wind kicked up by driving cars really does kick dirt and trash over to the curb, and that can like work its way along the curb till it hits an opening. And so by blocking it and then coming by with the street sweeper, which you see in the next picture down, you can really prevent a lot of trash from getting into the storm drain system. On the right are photographs of the same catch basin before and after these screens were installed, and we have some good data. I've presented that. Oh, that was on the west side, I think, but we have some great data showing how effective this has been. Yeah, and it also blocks leaf litter. And leaf litter in a wet storm drain leads to a really nutrient-rich soup that grows indicator bacteria pretty effectively. So I think it looked like we were reducing indicator bacteria, but then it was also drought, so we could never quite tease apart what the cause and effect was there. Okay, so our history, prior to Measure B, street sweeping was conducted in the commercial zones. And it was done overnight, and in most of those areas at that time, parking was not an issue. Those areas either had 100% no parking signs, or if there was room to park, people just didn't park overnight in these areas. Then, after Measure B passed, there was a pilot residential street sweeping program conducted. It was realized you have to have signage. You know, there's just much more parking in a lot of these residential areas, and so that issue was studied. In 2002, City Council agreed to expand the program, including signage and outreach throughout the city, with the signage being on the lower west side and lower east side. And at that time, both programs were managed by streets. And with the installation of the signs, the police department started conducting enforcement, and so they would get revenue from those tickets that would fund the parking officers and also the street sweeping program. And Measure B would make up any difference. Then because it was difficult to understand all of the finances, how much was being brought in for ticketing. We weren't seeing all those numbers. In FY20, it was said that Measure B would make a set contribution. And I think it was $150,000 at that point, and then increased incrementally with inflation. And in FY23, the Creeks Division took over management of residential street sweeping. So split off from commercial, we managed residential. And the agreement was made that the police department would contribute $300,000 a year from what they were getting from the enforcement to street sweeping, and Measure B, again, would make up the difference. And then in FY24, as we moved into the S&R department, street sweeping is now managed by the Community Engagement Division, although we provide a lot of input. And part of that is because a big part of managing the street sweeping program is interacting with the public. Okay, so more on the prevailing wage requirement. So this was just a huge shock and change. There was an assembly bill that was put forward that would put into like a very specific line in the industrial labor code that specifically said street sweepers would be in a Department of Industrial Regulation. That did not go to a final vote. I don't know why, but it's still being, the Department of Industrial Regulation is still weighing in that this is 100% of public work and that you have to pay a prevailing wage. And then once you know that, you have to find the actual classification, and there's tables and tables and tables of different classifications. And the one that they have been approving is operating engineer, and that's a really high-paying job, and it could be similar to operating a crane and some pretty complex machinery. So the wages, we know from communicating with our contractors that the wages they were paying, and like including benefits, doubled, and so we went back out. I heard that, or I saw advertisements where the wage was $27 an hour, but it didn't say anything about benefits. Now I know that the operating engineer is $95 an hour. That includes benefits, but 65 without benefits and 95 with benefits. It's a lot of money, and it's more than some other professions. And we've tried really hard to ask our agency group, or CASQA, the California Association of Stormwater Quality, if they can look into this, because this is affecting every municipality in California. We've asked the city's lobbyist to look into it. Labor's, it's challenging.
Have you asked Greg Hart's office?
No, we haven't asked Greg Hart's office directly.
I want to ask him. He used to be on city council, and remember, he was like an author of Measure B.
Yes, that is a good point. So for the residential program, we went and reviewed and looked for any redundancies. And we also noted that we usually awarded the contract for a higher amount that would ultimately be billed, because there were a lot of cancellations due to holidays and storms. And so we reduced the number of miles that we put in our bid by 15%. But that shouldn't actually reduce street sweeping. So here's what the budget looks like for the last 3 years. So in FY23, the contract was, so let's just go down the columns. The contract in FY23 and 24 was about 300,000, and then the bid that we got back this time was 551,000. So a really huge difference. Before we took over street sweeping, we did not contribute to fuel and sign, maybe a little bit for sign. Now we contribute 50 to 60,000, or we budget 50 to 60,000 for, we pay for fuel and also for signage. There's always signs that need to be fixed. Revenue, that was not relevant when we were not managing the street sweeping program. Now it is. We get the 300,000 from the police department. And so what we're chipping in from our operating funds, you can see in the last column, it was really high in 2023, and this was a great move that we made for 2024, and then the wages changed, and so now we're even higher. This also does not include the fact that we now contribute staff time, and because we fund positions in community engagement. Now switching gears, I'll leave that up if anybody has any questions on that slide in particular. I know it's a lot. Also want to point out that we're continuing to learn by working on our street sweeping research project. We're engaging with people that are industry experts. In fact, we even had them review our bid document and make some suggestions. That was really helpful. So we went to almost exclusively regenerative air machines instead of broom machines, mechanical broom. They are much better at picking up fine particles, where most of the pollutants are attached to the fine particles. Our microplastic research grant, we are focusing on the microplastics, obviously, but we're also learning more about tire wear particles, and as I mentioned, how prevalent they are and how they contain these toxic compounds. And then also, with this grant, but also will be used for our next, when we go back out to bid, is we're tracking the amount of material that's collected, and we'll be able to assess that for each route. So we'll know which routes maybe we can cut back on frequency because they just don't accumulate as much. And we're also, for that data, we're also trying to collect an estimate of trash as part of the overall load that they dump to inform our trash amendment compliance. So our next steps, as I said, are to keep gathering data on material removed and on parked cars, review excuse me, the need for any additional signage and or enforcement. We have some areas that are not signed at all, and that was because 20 plus years ago, there weren't that many cars in those areas, and we all know neighborhoods have gotten just more crowded with parked cars. And assess areas for potential reduction in frequency. And then as soon as we have information, we can revise our contract annually. So once we feel that we have the information we need to adjust the curb miles per year, we will do so. And with that, this is just informational, so I'll take any questions.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Any questions from the committee?
I just had, and maybe you're not able to speak about it because it's a research project, but if you have any preliminary information that you found from some of the microplastic study, in particular, the 6-ppd quinone, like the tire wear, like we're basically seeing that that's everywhere. I don't know if you had any info to share.
I do have a little bit of information, not on tire wear particles or 6-ppd, but on microplastic, and I'll share that in the next presentation.
Yeah, I had a question. You said not including staff. How many folks do we have working in staff on this roughly?
Oh, I would say it's a small percentage of one position.
Okay.
I put a lot of time into it when we were going back out to bid, but we'll never have to put that much time into it again. And I would think that between invoicing and responding to the public, I don't know a number, maybe 10%.
So it seems that if there are cars parked where this machine is supposed to be sweeping the street, that those are in violation, right? And so if I leave my car parked in the zone where it's supposed to be street swept, am I getting a ticket if I'm parked there?
If it's signed for a specific time period, yes. Some neighborhoods
Thank
say,
you. My bad.
some neighborhoods just have a sign going into the neighborhood saying it's going to be swept on a certain day, and is no
Okay.
ticketing in that case.
This may be a ludicrous idea, but, you know, if we can impound 6 cars, sell them for $50,000 each, when we've reduced our exposure by about $300,000. It's just an idea.
None
Just
of my
an
cars
idea.
would sell for.
May not be a reasonable idea, but it's an idea. Thank you. Thanks, really appreciate, I know you're right, that we had talked about this maybe 6 months ago and asked for some more detail, and it was coming up out of, really, for another reason that we thought, you know, was important that isn't necessarily have the same validity now. But nevertheless, it's important. I mean, it's important to the cause and the goals of this committee, right? And meeting its goals. But it's also a financial, you know, impact that doesn't seem to get any better. So I appreciate the fact that it's being paid attention to, and I think there's probably more to learn next year. So thank you very much for doing the research and the report out.
And I want to echo that, thanks, because it's really interesting information. And I live in a neighborhood that's swept, but there's no signage at all. So, you know, people don't know when they're supposed to move their cars, and I don't know what the consequences of that are, but it's expensive to put signage up, that's the challenge, right?
Yes, that's correct. Expensive, and some people are concerned about excess signage.
Right, so you have these dilemmas.
And there's interesting new technology that's coming out. So like we've had a GIS and GPS ability to see how long it's taking each route to be completed, for example. And then now they just put cameras on the front of the sweepers. So maybe we can get some information about how many parked cars there are. So we're working with the contractor on that.
Go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to thank Chair Klein. This was really interesting for your questions, and that led to this. There's a lot of historical context in the background for the Creeks Division and street sweeping, so it's really exciting to see where we're getting to and to see that fusion of science and research. And is this effective as a stormwater management tool? So thank you for this additional information. That was all.
You're welcome. And
I just had one other question. So our budgets had to go up on this, and how harmful was that elsewhere in terms of reductions or things we had to impact on our spending?
this excess funding came out of our reserve.
Oh, it
So you
did?
could say it comes out of our future ability to
Let's see, okay.
complete large projects. And when, 1 year, that's not that much, but when it's every year,
No,
that's
I
it.
know, that
Yeah.
that doesn't last long.
Yeah.
Yeah, great question.
This is our fiscal year 2024 Water Quality Research and Monitoring Program summary. And committee member, Rulon Miller. This is new to you, I believe. I don't think that you've been to one of our presentations that summarizes our research and monitoring program.
No.
So I often will whip through the first few slides, but I'm going to read through them so that you'll have that information.
Take your time.
Okay. Okay. So I'll start off with explaining the purpose of our research plan and our overall objectives and questions. And I also want to remind the committee and the public that this is a really, at this level, this is a great level to weigh in on what we're doing. And we've had some of the public and committee members really ask us to address certain questions, and that's been really helpful in the past. So the purpose of our research and monitoring plan is to develop strategies for water quality improvement, including the evaluation and prioritization of projects and programs, understand changes over time in surface water quality, and that's the question that we get the most often, communicate effectively with the public about water quality, and we've added more recently, understand the role of climate change and sea level rise in altering creek conditions. And this is also a good point for me to jump in and say, there's a lot of goals here that we're not even touching right now, but they're still goals, and we just can't do everything all at once. So our more specific goals are assessing pollutants. So that's understanding which pollutants we should be concerned about. We have to quantify, first we have to get the concentrations, then we have to evaluate those concentrations against some kind of known toxicity or human health impact threshold. Like the number itself means nothing until we understand what we should be comparing it against. Then evaluate that. And then once we have problem constituents identified, then try to track them to their sources and figure out how they're getting into the creeks and storm drains and reduce them. Another goal is evaluating any of our projects. So before and after sampling, a lot of times that's upstream and downstream sampling before and after if we can. We want to implement hydrologic models of creeks in order to predict alterations in flow due to climate change, and this is one that we haven't tackled yet. We want to evaluate the role of infiltration and groundwater movement on creek water quality and quantity. So that's really like what is happening as a result of our progress in putting in a lot of SWIMP BMPs, and then including the intersection with sea level rise on that. Where feasible, evaluate the effectiveness of our city programs such as street sweeping and outreach in reducing pollutants. And I will say it's a lot easier to look at street sweeping than outreach. We want to evaluate long-term trends in water quality and quantity. So we've added quantity more recently, and that was really as a response to the drought. We want to and have to meet our any monitoring requirements for grants, meet our general permit, stormwater monitoring requirements, also attend to any 303D listed impairments. So I know that's jargon, and I'm not going to go into the details on that right now. And keep developing contemporary tools to continue our research and try to do that in as rigorous a way as possible, and often try to do it in a way where we can get our data published, if not in a peer-reviewed journal, at least in some kinds of reports. And that's why we've done a lot of partnering with others. So for FY24, the required monitoring, we have general permit monitoring. We have to do outfall testing once a year in dry weather. We have to do, the last time our permit was renewed, so I think 8 years ago, we met with the Regional Water Board and negotiated what our required monitoring would be. And so we'll be coming up on that again. We'll have to be doing that again in the next year or so. So we decided on, our water bodies are listed under the Clean Water Act for many different pollutants, but we agreed on a small subset of monitoring that we would do on a weekly basis. And then we have some special studies, which is looking at the load reduction from our LID projects, like our permeable paver projects. Our long-term monitoring is also biweekly and quarterly sampling, mostly for indicator bacteria and field parameters such as temperature, conductivity, pH. And then also long-term, we have our bioassessment program, which you've heard plenty about. And project monitoring in FY24 was mostly looking at the bird refuge. So some bird refuge results. We have automated data loggers at the 3 sites marked by purple in this map, and those loggers test for dissolved oxygen, salinity, temperature, pH, and chlorophyll every 20 minutes. And so now we have over 500,000 data points, which is, we're still figuring out how to manage all those data points. But we will look at 70,000 of them. So this is for, let's go back to the map. This is, I'm going to show you results from the site labeled Transect 2. It's just a static point at this time. We used to take a transect there, but now we just have the logger put out there. And I'm just going to show dissolved oxygen data. So this is dissolved oxygen in milligrams per liter for, oh, that's a typo. That should say 36,000 data points before the project and 41,000 data points after the project. And we even have more before the project. I was just trying to get the most recent similar number. These box plots, the box itself shows 25 to 75% of the values fall in that box. And then the horizontal line across is the median. So you can see that after post-project, the median has gone up over 3.5 times, which is incredible. We just don't know. And now 5 milligrams per liter is a threshold for water quality for warm water aquatic habitat. So anything besides salmonids, and probably even our salmonids can handle 5 milligrams per liter. This is a great number. We just don't know if this was from all the storms we had, or if this is from having more exchange from the gates opening, or a combination. So we'll get more data in the years to come. Our Clean Streets, Clean Seas grant. This is a really collaborative project, but we're in charge of several sub-studies as our other partners. So we're working with UCSB and USCC grant on a couple of specific studies, and then also some other, San Francisco Estuary Institute is doing a whole nother study, and Southern California Coastal Water Research Project is doing other studies. So combined with all of those studies and our matches, including in-kind, staff time is $1.2 million project to investigate the role of street sweeping in trying to remove microplastic from street surfaces and inside storm drains before they're discharged to the ocean. Okay, and so we provided an in-kind match with staff time, but also a $50,000 match to SQUIRP to conduct this simulated rainfall study. And this was great because they had already developed the project. They had already had it funded to build this rainfall machine, which is really complicated. They had to study the size and the speed and the kinetic energy of rainfall, of droplets, and have them match rain as closely as possible. They were already going to do this and test for conventional pollutants. And so we just had to add the money for the microplastics, which was incredible. And because they were doing that, we also added some pesticide testing, funding for them to test for pesticides, and also for them to do some really cutting edge toxicity testing that is not the typical organismal toxicity testing, but cell culture. And I can't even begin to describe it, so I'm not going to. And we, okay, and so some results, I've presented some results from that study showing that it did remove some of the microplastics. They had contamination issues with the microplastics in 2 of the 3 sampling events. And so we're really hoping that they're going to be able to continue on with this study because it does look promising for microplastics. And the conventional pollutants were reduced more than anyone expected to see. So that was really phenomenal. And then this is really exciting. This is some of the pesticides, this plot, and it's the concentration difference between having swept and not swept. So a positive, anything above 0 means there was an improvement in water quality from street sweeping. And the fipronil especially was reduced by or median of 40% from sweeping in 3 tests. But fipronil is really toxic. Fipronil has been identified as being one of the most likely contributors to toxicity in urban streams. And so, why, this was a beach parking lot, not close to any building where pesticides would be applied, but it is particle associated, and so it's probably blowing around. We've measured pesticides coming off of roof surfaces where we know there shouldn't be any pesticide applied. So I just think, in addition to some of the conventional pollutants, if street sweeping can really remove pesticides that are blowing around that are like, targeting, well, not targeting the aquatic insects, but they really impact the aquatic insects. That this is very, very exciting. So, and then as part of the grant, we've formed a technical advisory committee. We've had our first advisory committee meeting. We've gotten some good feedback. And then all of the groups are, except for this SCORP, are doing their wet weather sampling this winter. And then we're getting back together in January and discussing our sampling efforts, probably after that too. And that project still has 2 more years. So this is a long-term project. Our Laguna watershed source tracking, we've done dry weather testing in the Laguna watershed area. We then added some storm monitoring. We found that in this last year, we got the final report from UCSB, and there are higher levels of the human waste marker being found in storm drains during wet weather. We don't know exactly where it's coming from. We don't know where it's coming from. And this matches other really contemporary research by another group. There's a really large study in San Diego. It's called the San Diego Investigative Order, and it was required as part of a beach's TMDL. And they are finding, oh, wait, sorry, I said that wrong. No, this complements what was found as part of the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition for Southern California, which I'm also going to talk about in a bit. They are also finding really high levels of the human waste marker in storm drains and channels throughout Southern California in wet weather. Not really fit. Much more research needs to be done to understand that. The beach risk, the beach swimming risk assessment, I've talked to you also and presented entire presentations on that. So in FY24, the updates were that we got some wet weather results on so we did a dry weather study, and we took that all the way through. We collected the samples, we did the risk assessment, and we presented that at CASQA. But we also were able to reanalyze some samples that the county had and UCSB had collected during a lot of different rain events in the surf zone. And so we've gotten the marker results from those from UCSB. And so this is surf zone, not in the storm drain, and it's not as, those values are like more frequent detections than dry weather, but not extremely high levels. And they are being processed for pathogens as we speak. And then once we have those, we'll be able to do the quantitative risk assessment and see if it looks like we can argue for for different requirements here, for more risk-based criteria. And this work actually complements SCORP's, what's called the BITE 23 project, and we are participants in that. So we are also continuing to collect surf zone samples as our agencies all through Southern California and analyzing them for the human waste marker in dry and wet weather. So I don't think we're going to learn something new in this one, but we'll be able to put our results in a regional context. So maybe we'll get the cleanest beaches. Billboard, we'll see. And so I've mentioned the SoCal Stormwater Monitoring Coalition. We joined this coalition this year, and this is a group of stormwater agencies in Southern California that pool resources to do research projects that are relevant to stormwater management and water quality and permitting. And by pooling their resources, they can do a bigger project. And so they set, so we joined, and also the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board joined. So there are stormwater agencies that provide the funding, but there's also the water boards. The regional boards are also on the coalition, and so they don't fund, but they weigh in on these projects, and they say, like, I think that we would be able to use those results if you studied it a little bit differently. And so this is so effective to get their buy-in before the projects are done. And so it's really exciting to have the Central Coast representative also. And right now, every 5 years, they set a new research agenda, and that's being formed right now. It's really impressive. They put together a panel of, I think, about 15 subject matter experts and put them in a room for 3 days and said, come up with a list of good stormwater projects. And now we are prioritizing those, and then we'll decide which ones groups will choose to fund. And then we don't have to fund, I guess we would have to fund at least one. We would have to fund a share of at least one to kind of, otherwise we wouldn't be involved, but we don't have to fund any specific projects. And we will, once, if we do fund one of those projects, then we are on the technical working group. So this is also a great way to be, involved in research that is larger than we could ever complete ourselves. I'm really excited about it. They've done some amazing work. Okay, this is the last chapter. One thing we added in FY24 was to test for chemicals of emerging concern at our 4, what we call our integrator sites. So these are our most downstream sites for each major creek: Arroyo Burro at Cliff, Mission Creek at Montecito Street, Laguna Channel at Chase Palm Park, and Sycamore Creek at Railroad, the Railroad Bridge. And this was just a single grab sample during a storm on December 20th, 2023, and we had those tested for a group of chemicals of emerging concern called pharmaceutical and personal care products, PPCPs, and also PFAS, the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So we had tested for the PPCPs in Laguna Channel before, but not in any of the other watersheds. And we hadn't tested anywhere for PFAS. And so so this chart is each site, and it's the percent detection of the, there's 9 PPCPs that we tested for that were detected by at least one, and 17 PFAS compounds. There's a lot of different compounds. And so this is the percent detected of the group of compounds. So you can see at all sites, there were a lot of the personal care products detected and a lot of the PFAS constituents detected. Yeah, really interesting. And that was not the first storm of the year or anything like that. These are known to be everywhere. It's just, you might think Santa Barbara's a little cleaner than others. And I can't compare the results to, I haven't compared them to what's been found in any other stormwater. I don't think that would be meaningful from one grab sample. The point of doing this one grab sample is there anything that jumps out as something we should be concerned about? So this is the personal care products, and the units are all in nanograms per liter. There are no thresholds to test these against. So we don't, and I would say the value of these compounds is almost more in tracking. How is this signal getting into our creeks? There's a bunch that weren't detected at all, and those are all listed on the right. And some of these are known endocrine disruptors, but we don't have any information about, length of exposure. We don't have any information ourselves from testing, but we also don't have any criteria yet on how to assess length of exposure for different concentrations and when we should be concerned. And then these are the PFAS compounds. And so here I've kind of flipped it. Here, for each compound, it's the percent of sites where there was a detection. So if it's 100% for PFOA, for example, that means we found it in all four sites. And then there's the maximum level that we detected. in nanograms per liter, which is parts per trillion. It's really low concentrations. And then there's the US EPA has set aquatic life protection criteria for 2 of these compounds. And so for PFOA, which is really toxic to humans, from what I've read, we're just so far below that. Orders of magnitude, that's not jumping out as an issue that we need to chase. But for the PFOS, that we are within the same order of magnitude of the aquatic life chronic criteria. And so that's just from one grab sample. So there's a chance, for sure, we have samples that will be higher concentration than that. So this is one where, yeah, I think we should continue to either continue to test ourselves, keep our eye on the literature and the research that's coming out. Neither of those 2, PFOA and PFOS, are not allowed to be produced in the U.S. or sold in the U.S. anymore, but it still lingers in the environment. Okay, and the next steps are completing the report for this year, completing our sampling for FY25, and coming back to you in June with our FY26 proposed research plan. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you so very much. Incredible amount of information.
I hope
Very
not too much.
impressive. Any questions from the committee?
Yeah, I had a question. Jill, by the way, this is just incredible. I mean, I'm just blown away.
Thank you.
We don't have all the answers, but finding out what the problems are is the first action, of course. On one of your slides, you said research plan goals, employ contemporary tools to conduct advanced research. I guess I'm just curious about how our group goes about evaluating or finding new technologies, street sweepers, whatever, and there are more than that, and best practices. Do we have a group that strategically is organized to do that, or do we have our operating groups each look into their various areas of that for future opportunities?
My intention on writing that goal was more for monitoring tools.
Yeah.
So that would be staff at the city who are involved in monitoring. So Caroline and myself and any partners that we have, and we go to a lot of webinars and a lot of seminars, and just being part of the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition, basically going to conferences,
Yeah.
presenting, pushing yourself to present, then people talk to you more. And going around and looking at the posters and going to as many talks as we can, looking at literature. So something kind of nagging at me on that one is there is a lot of new, you probably know the name of this. It's like Arduino type technology, like really cheap sensors that, are probably almost disposable in a way compared to like the logger that we have at the bird refuge. Each one is $14,000. When you see how many data points are collected compared to staff time, it's worth it. But if there's a bunch of other, like almost DIY, I guess that's the word I was looking for. There's some DIY sensor technology coming on board. And that, yes, it does take, I have to remember, like, I need to go watch that webinar that someone sent me before too many years pass by. But yes.
On your second and third slide, when you talk about climate change and hydrologic models, I was wondering if you were taking advantage of any of the Inflation Reduction Act programs for the monitoring equipment and staffing needed for that.
We haven't seen any solicitations for that except for I just saw some very recent gauging grant information come through.
Oh, nice.
And we are looking into that.
Okay.
The street sweeper study does come from the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any additional?
Thank you. Any additional
questions?
No, thank you so very much again.
Thank you for your attention.
Okay.
All right, so our last item of this evening is the 2025 regular meeting schedule, which is attachment 4, and this is for action. So we just need your approval that this looks okay. You'll notice that we did reduce the number of meetings to 10 meetings, and a couple of these are expected to be site visits. So there'll be some changes to the address, but we will notify you of those changes once they do come around.
Thank you, Stephanie. May I have a motion so that we might approve this regular scheduled meeting for 2025, please?
Moved.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or opposition? Hearing none, that passes unanimously, and that will be accepted as the 2025 regular meeting schedule for this committee.
Thank you, committee members.
Thank you all very much. If no one has any other business, I think we'll call this meeting adjourned. I think, hey, look at that, 1 minute over. So thank you again, and happy holidays.